Welcome to the 51st Lester Breslow Distinguished Lecture. I'm Ron Brookmeyer, Dean of the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health. We've come together today to honor and celebrate the legacy of Dr. Lester Breslow, who is known to many as Mr. Public Health. He was an extraordinary public health leader, a widely renowned researcher, professor, and mentor to many, and the second dean of our School of Public Health here at UCLA. Throughout Dr. Breslow's public health career, which spanned more than 70 years, he had incredible impact. He made the case for the critical importance of prevention. His groundbreaking findings linked healthy habits like exercising, getting enough sleep, eating well, and not smoking with living a longer life. His work provided key data linking smoking and lung cancer, arguably one of the greatest achievements of public health. Dr. Breslow held many important positions throughout his extraordinary career, including president of the American Public Health Association, director of the California Public Health Department, and dean of our School of Public Health from 1972 to 1980. Dr. Breslow's legacy continues today in public health and our school, including the importance of evidence-based research, translating research into real-world solutions to save lives, and mentoring tomorrow's public health leaders. I'm so glad that Deborah Breslow is here with us today. Deborah, wife to Lester and partner in his career, remains dedicated to our school and to public health. Thank you, Deborah, for all that you do. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce UCLA's Fielding's 51st Lester Breslow Distinguished Lecturer, Dr. Yifang Zhu, Professor of Environmental Health Sciences at the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health. Dr. Zhu is an alum. She earned her PhD in Environmental Health Sciences in 2003. Dr. Zhu's research focuses on air pollution, climate change, environmental exposure assessment, and aerosol science. Her most recent work, covered extensively by local and national media, examines indoor and outdoor air quality following the 2025 Los Angeles wildfires, and provides critical information about post-fire recovery efforts. Dr. Zhu is a member of a number of high-profile research teams, including the LA Fire Health Study, the Community Action Project Los Angeles for Post-Air Fire Quality, or CAP-LA. She is a faculty associate in UCLA's Center for Occupational and Environmental Health, the Institute of the Environment and Sustainability, and UCLA Fielding's Center for Healthy Climate Solutions. Professor Zhu's scholarship has been recognized by several national awards, including the Rosenblith New Investigator Award from the Health Effects Institute, the National Science Foundation Faculty Early Career Development Award, and the Hagen-Smith Prize from Atmosphere Environment. In addition to her impactful contributions to research, Dr. Zhu served as the Senior Associate Dean for Academic Programs in our school. And in that capacity, I had the very good fortune to work closely with Yifang. And when I think of Yifang, her work ethic, her teaching, her research, her impact, and the example that she sets, the words that come to mind are true excellence. Yifang's lecture today will be followed by a Q&A session. Please submit your questions by clicking on the Q&A button near the bottom of your screen. I am delighted that Yifang will deliver the 51st Lester Breslow Distinguished Lecture. Please join me in welcoming Professor Yifang Zhu for her lecture, From Invisible to Visible, How Air Pollution Research Informs Action in a Changing Climate. Yifang, it is so wonderful to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dean Brookmeyer, for your kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here today. I'm deeply honored and humbled to serve as this year's Lester Breslow Distinguished Lecturer. Many colleagues who have delivered this lecture before me have had long and distinguished careers spanning multiple decades. I am still very much in the middle of my own journey. So today, I will mostly be sharing a few moments from my past and some challenges and opportunities I see ahead. For context, I did my undergrad in environmental engineering at Tsinghua University in Beijing. There, I learned chemistry, physics, and engineering principles. I joined my late mentor, Dr. Bill Hein's lab at UCLA in 1999 as a doctoral student to study aerosol science and technology. I still remember my very first time flying into Los Angeles. As the plane approached LAX, I looked out the window and saw long lines of slowly moving cars on what I later learned was the I-405 freeway. I also saw something that I have never seen before, a thick brownish layer suspended in the air. Because I majored in environmental engineering, I had heard about LA smog, and I knew it was bad. But in that moment, I did not understand why it was harmful or what it meant for people's lives. I certainly did not know that those cars and that layer in the sky would become the foundation of my career. Back then, I didn't even know what public health was about. Time flies. Now, I'm proud to call myself a public health scholar, and I have learned something simple but powerful from leaders in our field, especially Dr. Breslow. Public health begins with prevention, and prevention begins with identifying risk factors. Today, I hope to carry that forward by showing how air pollution research can make invisible risks visible to protect public health. I've organized this talk into 4 parts: making exposure visible, evidence visible, purpose visible, and the future visible. They're all grounded in the fact that many environmental health risks are invisible, and that our responsibility is to make them visible for those impacted most. To make exposure visible, I want to start with 3 examples. The first is the I-405 freeway near University Village, where many UCLA graduate students and postdocs, including myself, have lived and built families for years. That freeway defined my early research. The second example is electronic cigarettes, also known as e-cigs. They are often framed as producing just water vapor and are very popular among our youth. The third example is the recent LA wildfires. While you can see debris and ashes in this photo, the fires also released a complex mixture of invisible pollutants that lingered in communities long after the flames were out. These 3 examples may seem very different at first glance, but they actually share the same challenge. When exposure is invisible, risk is easy to ignore. So the first step is to make exposure visible through measurement. When I started my PhD research, there was emerging epidemiological evidence suggesting that living near freeways was associated with adverse health outcomes. But proximity was often used as a proxy for exposure without really knowing what people were actually breathing. So I set out to take measurement in the real world. This photo shows me in the field using various instruments to measure a wide range of traffic-related air pollutants near the I-405 freeway. What we found was striking. Ultrafine particles, tiny enough to penetrate deep into the lungs, were about 30 times higher immediately downwind of the freeway than upwind. Their number concentrations declined exponentially with distance, returning to near background levels at about 300 meters or roughly 1,000 feet. This was important because it shifted the conversation from simply near versus far to a measurable exposure gradient directly tied to traffic emissions. Once exposure is quantified in this way, we can communicate the risk and take the necessary actions. Once we understood how air pollutants behave near freeways, the next obvious question was what happens to the people who live near freeways and commute through traffic? So we conducted follow-up studies inside University Village and inside vehicles driving on freeways. We found that a substantial fraction of freeway pollutants can actually penetrate indoors. Homes closer to freeways consistently had higher pollutant levels, not just outside, but inside, compared to homes further away. The same pattern holds for vehicles. So where you live and where you commute matters, and how buildings and vehicles are designed and ventilated matters too. This is where the science becomes actionable, because ventilation and filtration are things we can change. So the next question became, can we use them to reduce exposure, especially for children? In the US, about 25 million children ride school buses. Most ride them 180 days a year, often for nearly a decade. For many children, exposure to traffic pollutants comes mostly from those bus rides. The good news is that installing high-efficiency cabin air filtration can reduce that exposure by more than 80%. It was a great example to show how measurement can lead to intervention. Here, children are exposed unintentionally simply by riding their school bus. The next example is different because their use are targeted directly. Electronic cigarettes were introduced around 2007 and were marketed as a safer alternative to tobacco cigarettes. Very quickly, e-cigs evolved. They came in thousands of flavors, were aggressively marketed, and became especially appealing to adolescents. When Zhu entered the market in 2015, its sleek design, high nicotine delivery, and ease to hide led to a rapid rise in use among high school students. At that point, research was still catching up. Very little was known about what users and the people around them were actually inhaling. As the scientific evidence accumulated, it began to inform policy. FDA actions and state-level measures, including California's flavor ban, were followed by a decline in youth vaping. But the story does not end there. A new generation of smart AI-enabled devices is now entering the market, and their emission and health effects are still largely unknown. You don't need to read every detail on this slide. The takeaway is very simple. E-cigs do not just produce water vapor. They emit a complex mixture of chemicals including known carcinogens like formaldehyde and benzene, and toxic metals such as lead and arsenic. While overall levels are lower than in tobacco smoke, some compounds are comparable. And exposure is not limited to the users. Bystanders can inhale secondhand e-cig aerosol, much like secondhand smoke. We know all of this because many researchers have measured it. Without those measurements, e-cig would still be producing just water vapor. Without those measurements, we wouldn't have the regulations we have today. Without those measurements, the popularity of e-cigs would have been even higher than now. That is why we work so hard to measure. So far, I've talked about traffic and e-cig that are part of everyday life. The LA fires are different. They were climate disasters that affect millions of people living in LA. This short video introduces our work on LA fires. The January 2025 Los Angeles urban wildfires was clearly a disaster. After the fire was contained, we got lots of emails and questions from residents just asking, is it safe to return to home? What happens during the active fire and what happens post-fire are very different things. Once the flames were out, overall, the outdoor air quality became better than the indoor air quality. So the big take-home message is you should really increase the ventilation going on in your indoor spaces. Our results from the indoor-outdoor testing clearly shows the lingering effects. And our soft goods testing also shows the same thing. Stuffed animals, clothes, pillows. Those materials can continue to give out chemicals for quite a bit of a time. Carcinogens like arsenic, lead are neurotoxics, and surprisingly, their levels are still remain relatively high. There are lots of measures people can take immediately to reduce their exposures to air toxics, increase ventilation when the outdoor air quality is good, or just running your HEPA air purifiers. As a public university, we have a responsibility to make sure our research actually benefits the public. It's our obligation to turn our scientific knowledge into something tangible that can protect public health. As you just saw at the end of the video, CAP Air, a community-driven post-fire air quality monitoring network, was one of the tangible ways we try to turn knowledge into action. It provides real-time local air quality data with the goal of translating measurements into information people could actually use. To do that, we developed this public dashboard using color-coded signals instead of numerical values for pollutant concentrations. The dashboard has been accessed by more than 20,000 unique users since it was launched. We also created an automated alert system. When pollutant levels exceed health-based thresholds, residents receive email notifications so that they can take actions. CAP Air shows how measurement, communication, and community partnership come together, especially during fire recovery. Just as we saw in this CAP Air example, measurement alone is not enough. Once exposure is visible, we must make sure people can act on that information. That brings me to the next section, making evidence visible. When our freeway study was published, it was the first time I engaged with the media. I quickly learned that I needed to translate technical findings, such as the exponential decay of particle number concentration downwind from freeways, into something more accessible. People living within 1,000 feet of major roadways are exposed to much higher levels of traffic-related air pollutants. Over time, this body of evidence informed policy discussions in California. One tangible outcome was legislation prohibiting the construction of new schools within 1,000 feet of major roadways. Seeing that connection from measurement to communication to policy completely changed how I view my work. I shifted from an engineering mindset to a public health mindset. Because when data translate into real protection for children, research becomes much more meaningful and deeply rewarding. The previous example shows how evidence, when communicated clearly, can protect public health. Electronic cigarettes tell a very different story. In this 2010 film, The Tourist, Johnny Depp's character says, "E-cig delivers nicotine but produces just water vapor." That message, echoed in media and marketing, framed e-cig as a safer alternative to tobacco cigarette. But safer does not mean safe, and that distinction was rarely mentioned. This is where I think about Dr. Breslow's work. He reminded us that public health is not just about individual choice, it is about population risk. The LA fire work brought a very different communication challenge. Unlike the freeway studies, where we had years of data and published papers, the fires unfolded in real time. We did not have all the answers. Much of the research was still underway. But at the same time, communities needed information and guidance. That means being transparent about what we knew and what we didn't know, and being clear about what people could do based on what we knew. The LA fires taught me that making evidence visible does not always mean having perfect answers. Sometimes it means offering timely, honest guidance to support communities in the face of uncertainty. In a disaster like the LA fires, no single group has all the answers. The challenges were complex, the information was incomplete, and the needs were urgent. In moments like this, collaboration is absolutely essential. Indeed, the LA fires brought together researchers, government agencies, community organizations, and local leaders, each contributing different expertise and perspectives. We also worked hard to communicate clearly and consistently, because when communities are under stress, mixed messages undermine trust. So we tried, not perfectly, to speak with one voice, grounded in the best available evidence. But you may ask, why do we measure exposure? Why do we communicate risk? What is the purpose? Because air pollution affects health and costs people's lives. Air pollution is now the second leading risk factor for premature death globally, responsible for about 7.9 million deaths each year, nearly the population of New York City lost annually. Dr. Breslow's early work defined tobacco, diet, and being overweight as major drivers of poor health. And they remain high on the list today. But now air pollution sits above them. And that tells us something important. Air pollution is not just an environmental issue, it is a leading public health issue. It contributes to heart diseases, stroke, lung cancer, diabetes, and adverse birth outcome. And it disproportionately affects the most vulnerable population. This is why we measure. This is why we communicate. Because behind those concentration data are people's lives. Los Angeles was once known worldwide for smog. When I arrived at UCLA as a doctoral student, I joined a community of amazing scholars in air quality research, many of whom are shown here. Across exposure science, epidemiology, toxicology, and policy, their collective work built the evidence for regulation. And because of that science and the policies it informed, we have seen something remarkable. Over the past 25 years, PM 2.5, fine particles linked to various diseases and premature death, has declined by about 60%. That progress did not happen by chance. We measured exposure, we link it to health, we translate evidence into standards, and enforce them. We still have work to do, but Los Angeles, once defined by smog, is much cleaner today. Even as our population, vehicles, and economy have grown. This is what happens when good science informs good policy. But carbon dioxide is a very different story. Despite decades of warnings, the curve keeps rising. When I look at this figure, what strikes me most is not just upward trend. It is how many major climate milestones are marked along the way. The first Earth Day, the creation of the IPCC, the Paris Agreement, and yet the curve does not bend. That contrast is important. For air pollution, we had clear evidence, regulatory authority, and measurable improvements. For climate change, the science is just as strong, but the political, economic, and global challenges are much greater. This is why making purpose visible matters. Because climate change is often framed as a global environmental issue. But at its core, it is a public health issue impacting many local communities. When we talk about climate change, we're not just talking about rising temperature. We're talking about human health. Climate change affects health across interconnected systems, physical, ecological, and social. There are direct effects, extreme weather, wildfires, heat stress. There are effects mediated through natural systems, changes in air quality, water safety, and food insecurity. And there are effects mediated through social and economic systems, displacement, conflict, and mental health impacts. Because climate change affects human health, climate policy should be viewed through a health lens. In this work, we ask a simple question. What happens to population health if California reaches net zero by 2050? The results are encouraging. California is already reducing greenhouse gases, and net zero is technically achievable. But here's the important part. The benefits go beyond carbon. When we reduce fossil fuel combustion, we also reduce air pollutants, and that translates into fewer premature deaths with the biggest gains in communities that carry the heaviest pollution burden. Climate action indeed can deliver immediate local health benefits, and that's why health must be built into climate policy. We live in a world full of change, and sometimes it feels like that the only thing not changing is climate change. If we look into the future, if we treat climate policy as health policy, then the energy transition is one of the most powerful public health interventions of our time. Here, our analysis shows that clean energy can reduce emissions substantially across different sources in our homes, in transportation, in industry. Transition to clean energy is not just about decarbonization. It can deliver cleaner air and climate benefits at the same time. The question is how we design the transition to improve public health and reduce health disparity. Looking into the future, we also cannot ignore AI. Just like the energy transition is reshaping our physical system, artificial intelligence is reshaping our information system right now. I think AI holds real promise for public health. It can detect outbreaks earlier, analyze complex data faster, and help design more targeted interventions. It can make public health more proactive instead of reactive. But it also carries real risks. It can worsen health inequities if biased data are used. Its growing energy usage, especially from data centers, can increase local air pollution and heat exposure. It also raises concerns about privacy, trust, and transparency. And in public health, trust is foundational. So the question is not whether AI will change our future, it already is. The question is whether we will use it, strengthen equity, and protect public health. Energy transition is long-term. AI is evolving with uncertainty, but LA 28 is different. It has a date, it has a place, and that means we can prepare for it. To me, LA 28 is more than a mega sporting event. It is a large-scale public health stress test. But it also gives us opportunities to accelerate clean mobility, strengthen surveillance systems, integrate climate resilience, and protect vulnerable communities, not just for a few weeks, but for decades. And importantly, it allows our fielding school to make our work visible on the global stage. I'm pleased to share that our school has established a public health task force to prepare for the Olympics and future mass gathering, and will welcome partnerships in this effort. If we do this well, LA 28 will not only showcase athletes, it will showcase public health. Before I close, I want to return to the theme of this talk, making the invisible visible. First, I want to acknowledge my collaborators, students, and postdocs who have worked so hard with me over the years. I appreciate them and continue to learn from them, new knowledge, new skills, and new ideas. I also want to recognize another kind of invisibility, our staff. Behind every publication are people managing budgets, coordinating hiring, and ordering supplies. Their names may not appear on journal articles, but without their contributions, there wouldn't even be any journal articles. Many are listed on this slide, many more are not. Special thanks to Dr. Chen and Dr. Yao for helping translate my ideas into some of the slides you've seen today. This lecture, like the work it represents, is truly a collective effort. I also want to acknowledge the funding agencies that have supported my work over years. Research depends on sustained investment. That support allows us to measure what is invisible, respond in times of uncertainty, and translate science into action that protects public health. Let me end where I began. When the smog clears in Los Angeles, UCLA. I'm deeply grateful to do this work here at UCLA, in a city that has shown change is possible. Because science made the invisible visible, and because leaders like Dr. Breslow, showed us that prevention is powerful. I truly believe that if we measure carefully, communicate effectively, and act collectively, we can clear more than smog in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Yifang, for your presentation and sharing your terrific work. You have really had a tremendous impact on public health. So now we are going to move to the Q&A session. And just a reminder to our audience, there's a Q&A button and you can enter your questions and we'll try to get to as many as we can. And we already have a bunch coming in. So let me start with the first question. Let's go. A year after the fires, is the air safe to breathe in the impacted communities and the communities nearby?
Thank you. Thank you, Ron, for this great question. This is the same question we got from community members still as 1 year after the fires. So as I briefly mentioned in the video, the outdoor air quality in general returned to what LA background looks like after the active fire period is over. But inside the burn zone, there are still certain activities going on. That's why we set up this cap air network to monitor air quality, outdoor air quality at a very local scale so that the information can be used by the residents that are impacted post-fire by those post-fire activities. What we have seen from the cap air data so far is most of the concerns still comes from those larger particles related to construction activities, related to removing debris, and some certain activities that going on very locally and in a very sporadic way. So I would say overall, the outdoor air quality returns to what LA normal background by now, but there's still some local, very local sources going on inside the burn zone. But the most important part is the indoor air quality. Even after some homes going through remediation, we still don't quite know what that indoor air quality looks like. I think this is the remaining challenges and gaps. We are actually working very actively to try to tackle that questions, helping the communities to figure out what indoor air quality looks like after different remediation measures and what is the right remediation measures people can actually take. And so that's something that we're currently working on.
Great, thank you. What advice do you have for someone in LA to breathe healthier air? What can a typical person do?
That's another wonderful question. We live in LA. Like as a show, LA air quality has improved over decades, thanks to all those amazing work many colleagues have put in their career. But we still have work to do. We're not quite meeting the air quality standards yet. So in my mind, I think there's two parts. One of the big responsibility, I think, still lies into pushing policies, regulations, like transition, like I mentioned, transition to cleaner energies. So there's some efforts that my colleagues at South Coast Air Quality Management District, they modeled. So the whole LA essentially needs to transition into zero emission, like across all sectors for us to have a hope to meet the national ambient air quality standards moving forward. But that's important because that means once we do that, then everybody have the cleaner air to breathe. So that being said, I think there's also efforts that individual can do to reduce their exposures in their daily life, especially in the indoor environment. As we know, most of us spend majority of our time inside our offices, inside our homes. So there are ways people can do to reduce their exposures inside their indoor spaces, like something I briefly mentioned in the video, having a HEPA air purifiers running, make sure the ventilation system is regularly cleaned, and using high efficiency filtration system in your home if that's possible. All of those measures can help. And also be mindful about those indoor sources that are often overlooked by people because, again, they're invisible risks, right? There are lots of emissions come out from cooking, from the gas stoves you're using, burning candles, using cleaning materials, all of those add to exposure in your daily life. So just be mindful about that. That can also help to reduce your overall exposure to air pollutant.
It's great. Thank you. And I remember I came to you once. I was worried about air quality, and you suggested I get some air monitors, which we did for our home, and I check them regularly. So thank you for that. And actually, something you just said about stoves connect with one of our questions that did come in from a listener. How concerned should we be about exposure levels from things like gas stoves and furnaces inside our homes? How do you compare and contrast these health risks to external ambient exposures?
That's a great question. Thank you for that question. We actually have ongoing projects funded by California Air Resources Board, specifically looking at gas appliance emissions on air toxics. And we just completed a draft report synthesizing knowledge that has been going on in California for over the past 20 years about indoor air quality progress and still remaining challenges. So gas appliances, they do emit quite a bit of different pollutants, especially nitrogen dioxide, particulate matter, ultrafine particles, all those pollutants I mentioned. And because they are in the indoor spaces and because they're close to us, the proximity effects that we learned in freeway also apply to your indoor space. You're right there cooking and breathing what comes out from the gas appliance. So the impacts could be substantial, right? And I also think just in the overall climate action, right, transition those buildings, right, into electrify and get cleaner energies to power our homes. That's also very important. That overall will reduce exposures and translate into health benefits, in my opinion.
Great, thank you. A question is coming about on the e-cigarette work, and that we see a decline in usage among youth in recent years, and which highlights how population level changes that benefit the public health is possible, which is good news. What do you see as the primary driver behind that trend of the decline in the e-cigarettes?
That's a great question. Another great question. So I think there's a couple of factors that is working together, right? It starts from making the invisible risk visible because we measure what comes out from it. Not just us, but across board, so many researchers to measure measurements, and then collectively those information translate into sort of like a public-facing knowledge, right? Before the conception is the perception is just water vapor, but once we know there's chemicals in the e-cig aerosols, then this will change the mindset from parents, schools, and adolescents. They start to see this is not really risk-free. And then the policy impact is also important. The flavoring ban, because that's also informed by the research, right? The flavors that came out, all sorts of different flavors. That's number one, is very attractive to adolescents. At one point, e-cig has like zero nicotine, but like strawberry flavors, right? And kids really see that as something cool and not having risk. But over time, we realize that's not the case. And so the flavoring ban, I think, also have a major impact. And then there's also certain aspects about like you're just putting more like careful regulations on the industries, right? Zhu went through some lawsuits and just make this more visible to the general public about the potential risk that associate with vaping. I think all of those more or less contribute to the decline in youth vaping.
Great, thank you. During your talk, you mentioned a little bit about artificial intelligence, which is really impacting so many different fields right now. And a question came in, if you could expand a little bit about how AI might transform air pollution work and public health research, what insights could it unlock to not having AI available?
Yeah, thank you for that question. As I mentioned, like I think AI really have two sides. There's promise, there's also real risk. I can give a very concrete examples about like how we use AI in our research. We actually, because we're interested in energy transition, we've been trying to understand the electronics, not electronic cigarette, electric vehicles and how the EV charging stations were distributed across different communities. Because if there is disparity in terms of accessing EV charging stations, that will be a hurdle for certain communities to adapt EVs in addition to financial burdens. So one of my doctoral students is interested in doing that analysis. And one day he told me, Dr. Zhu, I found this amazing data set. It's almost like a Google Doc plus Yap type of a platform where all the EV users just put their experience about using different EV charging stations in the United States. And he downloaded more than 500,000 texts, just like Yap reviews. This is an EV charging station reviews. There's 500,000 of those. I say if the students took time and go through all of them, it would take 3 years to complete a PhD to go through this text. But now the timing is just perfect. And now we have this artificial intelligence large language model. So instead of going through all those 500,000, the student went through 3,000 and trained the AI to work with them and then make sure the AI generate consistent information and validate by human readers. And so we reduced the effort from 500,000 texts to 3,000. It still took a few months, but after that, we can just feed the 500,000 to AI and it just gave beautiful answers. So that I think is something that we couldn't do, without this type of tool. So I think that's really promising. In terms of that, I often think about when I was doing my freeway study, I took a lot of videos about what's going on 405. It took me hours, a good summer, to sit in front of TV and to count vehicles. But I think that could really be done by artificial intelligence like this. So I definitely think there are promises to use AI in public health. But I think also I mentioned there's also risks, right? I often think this is more it's a tool, it's an invention, it's really exciting. Just like the car was first invented, right? The car, there's accident, people die from it, there's air pollution coming off it. Those involved over time. I think we need to kind of think about what is the seatbelt for AI, just like what we identify as the seatbelt for driving. What is the speed limit, right? What is the do not drink and drive? Right? What is the tailpipe emissions, unintended, unrealized when the invention came to life? So I think all of that, just to stay vigilant and monitoring the progress, I think is really important.
Great, thank you. You mentioned the task force that we have on the Olympics, which involves things like pandemics, but also air quality. And what kind of preparations do you think we should be doing particularly from the viewpoint of indoor air, around the 28 Olympics?
Thank you for this question. Thank you, Ron, for your leadership to help to establish this task force. I mean, for air quality perspective, I think there's definitely a room for accelerate transition to clean mobility. This LA28 is already committed to zero emission bus in, no private vehicle driving into the game. So that's fantastic. But where we get this energy, I'm also working with some engineering colleagues trying to push for hydrogen energy sources, getting cleaner energy to start with. And when it comes to indoor air quality, one of my favorite topics, I'm thinking about the athletic village that will be right on our campus, right? UCLA will turn into the village, and there is tremendous opportunities for us to work with the upper campus, which I am actively engaging with some of the colleagues on the upper campus to make sure that the indoor air quality is good, and that the athletes because they're gonna perform. We want them to breathe the cleanest air as much as we can offer in LA during the games. So I think there's definitely opportunities to provide the information about what's going on in the indoor spaces through sensor monitoring and offering options. Could be HEPA filters or other options to reduce the exposures while they're asleep at night. right? So then they can have better performance during the games. So I'm very excited about the opportunities to work on those all of those things during the Olympics.
Great, thank you. One of the themes of your presentation is about data and measurements, and that helps make things visible. One question came in on the topic. Will you please speak to the data collection challenges and variations in measurements from indoor air quality? And also more generally, how should we communicate your findings to impacted communities in a manner that will increase the appreciation for the importance of climate change and its health impact?
Yeah, that's another great question. That's the theme of the talk. The science starts from taking measurements. I'm a trained as aerosol scientist, so I take measurements. So I think we need to just be careful about what we measure, and certain things like oftentimes this fire really teach me a lot. Like if we don't look for it, then as if the pollutant is not there. And we sometimes cannot measure everything, right? So that's really something that we just need to be humble about. As an honest scientist, we don't have all the answers. We measure what the tools allow us to measure, and we measure things based on our prior knowledge. But when we're facing those unprecedented challenges, sometimes we just have to be clear that we didn't have all the answers. So taking measurements, I think, is always the first step in my mind to just get to know what is out there, and then translating that measurements into information people can actually use. These people could be policymakers. They can use it to come up with policy. Or this could just be, like Ryan mentioned, a regular people living in LA trying to reduce their exposures. So I think it's also very important to communicate clearly, learn how to do that as part of our job to train the next generation and ourselves to be a better communicators, like translate complex information into something that is more accessible to the general public. I think those are all both important.
Absolutely. Being able to communicate complex ideas and data and making it understandable, because that's how we make change, is making it understandable. And there is one question that's connected to this idea that came in, asking about your view to the extent that public health scientists should recommend certain policy actions, or should we limit our focus to helping policymakers understand the trade-offs? How active should the public health scientists be in this?
That's another great question. So I think in public health we have public health professionals engaged in different aspects of public health, right? There are people who are more focusing on discovery, the science part. There's also public health professional. There's advocacy groups. Like we train some of our FACNIC students, right, to become advocacies for the community. So there's definitely also that. And there's also communication people that there just needs to help translate those complex information, data into information. I speak as a more on the scholar side and more on the researcher side. I think it's important for us to do rigorous science and then generate data that we're confident about, and translate that data into something that is accessible and understandable and actionable. And then I think we should clearly communicate to policymakers, to public health, to general public. But I think we better to stay neutral in a way that we are the one who generates science and translate science into understandable messages. But I think the decision still needs to sit with the policymakers, and they have to evaluate other factors into their decision makings. But that being said, I think there's definitely opportunities for certain public health professionals to play a bigger role on the advocacy side.
Thank you. We have time for just one or two more questions. Here's one. Unfortunately, more wildfires are likely to occur. So in the aftermath of the fires, what are some key actions that communities can do to reduce risks?
That's a wonderful question. We know this LA fire is not going to be the last fire in LA. And no, LA is not the last city. Then they're going to experience this type of a mega fire. So the work still ongoing as bigger efforts in the LA firehouse study and the CAP LA and even beyond is really trying to come up with some sort of like a playbook to help the communities come up with sort of like actionable decision making trees type of guidance for post fire recovery, right? So I think that's really important. It's still a lots of discussions going on at this point. So I'm really feel fortunate I'm part of a bigger group. Lots of scholars, researchers with different expertise are working on this together. It's not just from the air side, there's also other aspects. And we're collectively trying to generate information that will guide the communities, not just support the fire survivors in this LA fire, but for the future fire as well.
Great. And I think our last question then is, so what advice? You've had a tremendous career, which continues to grow exponentially. And now, what advice do you have for students who would like to work in environmental health or more broadly public health? What lessons have you learned that you think could provide some guidance for our students?
Thank you, Ron, for this question. To be like as I mentioned, I'm still very much in the middle of my own journey, and so it's not quite bit or like advice, but sharing some of my reflections. So I think it's really important for students and young scholars to focus on the right questions. The question has to be really important because public health involves like just the world is changing. The challenges also change with time. So focus on things that are important for the society in the moment. And there's lots of information you can use. There's all those NIH and all those agencies, they publish their strategic plan. They already identify important research directions and questions they're interested in answering. So try to find alignment between like among those important things that the society cares about and your personal interest, your own passion, because I think that's important. Once you have this right question, then that get you motivated, that get you through the long nights, get you through those rejected papers, get you through those grants that you wrote but didn't get funded. And that also think is really important to stay positive in your career because failure in your experiments, and this is just the funding uncertainties and all of those parts, it's part of the job. It's part of academia, right? So I sometimes share with my students that, yeah, you see everyone's CV, how stellar those established scholar their CV, but you don't know their failure CV is 3 times longer than their successful CV. So every grants you take 3-5 more tries to get it. So it's really have to stay resilient and positive going forward. And above all, I think for students and junior faculty, it's really important, and everyone else, is to take care of ourselves, take care of our own health before we put our efforts into helping the communities to be healthy. I think just practice what Dr. Breslow mentioned, right? Eat well, sleep well, find time to exercise, because if the researchers get exhausted, then it's really very unlikely that the work will benefit the public more efficiently. So I think it's also important for the younger students and junior faculties to prioritize their own health in addition to hardworking.
Well, Yifang, I think that's good advice for anyone in any stage of their career, whether they're at early stage or late stage. So thank you. And I absolutely agree that asking the right question is really important. Sometimes finding the right question is harder than getting the answer to the question. But well, Yifang, this brings us to the end of our time together. And I want to thank you for being here today, delivering your lecture, the 51st Lester Breslow Distinguished Lecture, and for all your exceptional service to our school and to public health over the years. I've had the good fortune to work with you, and it has been a highlight for me. So again, thank you for being here. And I'd like to thank all of you, our listeners, for joining us today and being part of the enduring legacy of Dr. Lester Breslow. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.